Chapter 12 The Madman's Tale The Berlin police chief's response to my friend's cable must have been encouraging, and Holmes must have waited at the cable office for it. At dawn, I was roused from my comfortable bed, and we were soon on the Hamburg Express, which passed through Berlin en route to its eventual destination. Our journey is vague in my mind. I dozed fitfully a great part of the time, which was just as well since Holmes was indisposed to talk, and there were lines of worry and concern around his eyes and noble forehead, as was our custom whenever in the German capital. We checked into the Bristol Kempinski where I was grateful to wash away the dust of our journey. The following morning we made our way to the Alexanderplatz and the nerve center of the machine-like criminal investigation department of the Berlin police force. Holmes had for years enjoyed an entente cordiale with Yvonne Shalloway, famous Berlin police chief, and Arsène Pupin, the pride of the Sûreté. It was a fortuitous you-scratch-my-back agreement for all three, augmented by actual admiration and friendship. In the matter of the four detectives, they had actually worked together on a case, but that is another story indeed. Wolfgang von Schalloway was his small and dapper self, and after greetings got to business more rapidly than is customary on the Continent. To have his fellow investigator contact him was to summon his best efforts, and for it was a matter of pride that the German eagle display a sharp beak in the presence of the British lion. He is dragging you all over Europe. Nicht wahr, Doctor? I summoned a weary smile of agreement. I did not think you were in Venice for your health, and now Germany. It must be something big to entice Holmes from his beloved London. It could be, replied Holmes. Well, if you can throw some light on the matter of the Mannheim tablets, I will be in your debt. You have the thief, do you not? I asked. We have Heinrich Hublein in a facility for the criminally insane. That is all we have. The tablets? Poof! Von Shalloway's hands gestured expressively. There was a look of distaste around his firm mouth. Not satisfied? Far from it, Holmes. This happened 4 years ago. Hublein was not my only problem. The chief indicated a file on his desk, then tapped it with his index finger. 4 cases, gentlemen, all unresolved. You Britishers would call it a blot on my escutcheon. And it is. They are. Never mind. One thing I will say for Hublein. He was good luck. After he confessed, no more unresolved cases. The thief confessed? I asked. Is crazy, Nichwar, and the doctors say he is crazy. Catatonic they call him, withdrawn into a secret world within himself. Possibly this is so. Von Shalloway rose from behind his desk. as though to remove himself from the file he had referred to. There was a soft knock on his office door, and an assistant entered, registered on a gesture from the chief, and disappeared without saying a word. I recalled Holmes once saying that when Von Shalloway said "jump," his aides asked, "How high?" Holmes surprised me. "Tell us about the unresolved cases." He surprised Von Shalloway also. "I thought you were interested." His jaw abruptly clamped shut. "Never mind. Perhaps you can come up with something. I should not look a gift. A gift." "Horse in the mouth," I suggested. "Yeah, Watson is up on the, how you say, lingo." "He reads sensational American literature," commented Holmes dryly. "About those other cases." Von Shalloway was back at his desk with the file open, but that was purely a gesture of habit. Obviously he knew the contents backwards. "Better than 6 years ago, we have a robbery in Morentracy. The thief jimmied the door to a built-in stairs that served as the fire escape. It was a well-to-do apartment house, and out of all the residents he picks a suite occupied by a supposed financier, who we know is a big-time fence. His door is jimmied too, and a lot of money is stolen." "Aha!" I exclaimed. "A receiver of stolen goods would keep a lot of ready cash on hand." Von Shalloway pointed towards Holmes. "That he learned from you and not from sensational literature. Anyway, he went over the locks. Hammer was on the case." "Good man," said Holmes. "I trained him," replied Von Shalloway. "Something about the scratches on the locks rang a bell, and he went to Meltwesen." Fortunately this was not gibberish to me. A mind like Sherlock Holmes's had to be fascinated by the machine-like logic of the Germans and their genius for organization. I had heard from him all about the Meldwesen, the huge catalogue of cards that constituted the most exhaustive body of information on criminal matters assembled. Holmes referred to it as a crime machine, and since it took 160 rooms to house, I judged it to be a big one. It was the jimmy that was the clue. It was a special design used only by one man, according to our records. We picked him up soon enough. It had to be him. Only the night of the robbery, he was in jail on suspicion of involvement in a casino robbery in Bad Homburg. The case fell apart completely. Von Shalloway was on his feet again. "All four cases the same. In Bremen, a jewel robbery. The victim, we think, maybe he is a smuggler. His wife's jewels are taken, possibly also some diamonds that he spirited through customs. But no mind, the thief gets in with a glass cutter. Everything about the job spells one man whose modus operandi we have catalogued. So what happens? The suspect, the night of the robbery, is acting as a snitch in a wine-stube we are raiding in Berlin. My own men gave him an alibi. Von Shalloway accepted a capstan cigarette I offered him and lit it nervously. Danke, Doctor. Hmm, tightly packed, no? The American cigarettes are better. I prefer them, said Holmes. Anyway, we have constructed a machine. Our Meldwesen and criminal archive cannot fail. But still, I have those 4 cases. What about Hoobline? Make that 5 cases, Holmes. The 2 gold tablets were stolen from Mannheim's home in Spandau. As you know, Herr Mannheim has one of the largest collections of art objects in the world. The thief gained access through a 4th-story window. There is only one man who could have done it. Shady, also called the Shadow. He had an alibi? I asked, enthralled. We have never found him. We know all about him, of course. He uses suction cups on his hands and attached to his knees. He can go up a wall as smooth as glass. The Mannheim case, we heard a lot about that from high places. Herr Mannheim's steel mills are important to Germany. There were traces. Our technicians found indications of rubber on the outer wall of the building. It had to be shady. But into headquarters comes this Hoobline. No record. He is pretty wild-eyed, but he insists that he stole the tablets. Von Shalloway thumped his desk with exasperation. It had to be shady, but try to convince a jury when they are facing a man who has confessed. Hoobline was convicted. He made no defense. The few words the lawyers could get out of him were incriminating. Then the doctors got hold of him. I agree with them. Hoobline has bats in his, how you say, belfry? Yeah, and now he is in the booby hatch? That is so, doctor. You say he has no record? Asked Holmes. Von Shalloway regarded us both with an embarrassed expression. Thanks God the journalist did not make much of the case. A confessed criminal is not news. Gentlemen, Heinrich Hooblein was a female impersonator. I half rose from my chair. Come now, Von Shalloway, you are pulling our legs. I wish it was so, but nay. Hooblein was entertainer. He had what they call a good act. He is small, dark of hair, with thin bones and classical features. Always he makes himself up as a blonde and he sings in high voice and pretty good too. Then at the conclusion of his turn, when the applause comes, he sweeps off his wig and audience realizes that he is not woman at all. A female impersonator, and a crime of the century, mused Holmes thoughtfully. I rather feel your newspapers missed a bet. Can I see this most unusual prisoner? Of course, but you will look over the 4 cases I mentioned, no? Von Shalloway was leafing through his records and extracted some typewritten sheets, which he handed to Holmes. "Study them, please. Every day I come in here, and I see that file, and then I think of Hoobline, and it is not such a good day suddenly." The sleuth nodded. "Might I first have a go at the Medicine? You know how it delights me." Von Shalloway turned to me with twinkling eyes. "Ah, he is looking for something." His bright eyes shifted back to Holmes. "I shall have Hammer escort you, and while you are going through files, Dr. Watson and I will have luncheon. I know a beer stew which has the best bratwurst you have ever tasted, Doctor." I winced. The German chief of police was as trim as a dancer, despite an astonishing capacity for dark beer and rich food, whereas I. But Holmes urged me to accept, and so it was that I spent the better part of 2 hours with Von Shalloway and returned to his office, feeling much the better for it. Holmes was waiting in the anteroom. "I had a delightful time in your files, Von Shalloway. The good Hammer offered to take me to see Hoobline, but I felt that Watson's presence would be beneficial. Medical opinion, you know." "Of course," I said, belching slightly. "By all means. Let us be off to the crazy house." The facility for the criminally insane was adjacent to the city jail. Holmes suggested that I have a discussion with the doctor in charge, while he inquired amongst personnel as to Hoobline and his attitude during his incarceration. Sergeant Hammer was taking us to the man's cell when I reported my findings. "A model prisoner, Holmes. Makes no fuss, and actually says nothing at all. Symptomatic of his mental disorder. He has become a mute, save on certain rare occasions, usually at night, when peals of laughter come from his cell," said Holmes. "One attendant I spoke to described the sound as devoid of mirth and of a mechanical nature, interrupted only by pauses for air." I shuddered instinctively. That man is not dangerous in any case, but silent, the worst kind for our purposes. We were at the cell door now, which Hammer unlocked for us. Heinrich Hooblein was as Von Shalloway had described him. He was sitting erect on the cot in his room, staring at the wall in front of him with small, black button eyes. I noted that his mouth twitched, but he made no notice of our entrance. Hammer closed the cell door and stood by in alert. Hoobline was classified as non-dangerous, but we were in a mental institution and a complete reversal of temperament was possible. Holmes remained motionless, studying the figure on the cot and possibly waiting for him to register our presence. In appearance, Hoobline seemed fragile, with a flat chest and delicate pipe-stem bones. I felt that his nervous system and sensory tissue had relatively poor protection, a contributing cause to what I diagnosed as a breakdown, followed by a deliberately enforced withdrawal from a world that was unbearable. He seemed the type that would react dramatically to a shock or a situation from which he demanded escape at all costs. Like many who have fled from reason, he was youthful looking. Who blind? It was Holmes using a soft tone in an inquisitive manner. The man nodded slightly as though we barely existed on the periphery of his existence. "The famous entertainer," continued the sleuth. There might have been a sudden flash in those dull eyes. I could not be sure. "This really will not do," said Holmes. His voice had a faint, chiding sound to it. "They will never know what you did." Hoopblind's eyes slowly, reluctantly abandoned the wall, and an inch at a time his face turned in our direction, the rest of his slight body remaining motionless. It was like a diver allowing the buoyancy of his body to bring him to the surface. When his head had made a 45-degree turn, he seemed to be looking through us and beyond. "They don't think you stole the tablets, you know. They certainly don't know about your great performance." The dark eyes came slowly into focus, regarding Holmes's expressive face, and I felt, actually seeing him for the first time, the sleuth's words seemed to have drawn him from another dimension. "It's never been done before, you know. Nobody ever thought of it but you." There was a flicker of understanding now, of interest. "How do you know?" His voice was husky, as though rusted from lack of use. I was conscious of hammer stiffening. Words from Hoopline had startled him. "I am Sherlock Holmes." The thin-boned, delicate face was fastened on the sleuth, and he pushed a lock of dark hair off his narrow forehead. To use the machine against itself, a revolutionary concept. The lips twitched again, and a half-smile forced itself shyly onto the pale face with almost translucent skin. "It was a good idea," he admitted. His words came easier this time. "But you must have had to practice. How did you learn to use the jimmy?" Now there seemed an actual desire to speak, to explain, to indulge, a starved vanity. They had diagrams of the tool in the files. Besides, you meet all kinds of people when you work in cabarets. So you got some tips from a swagman, also some instruction on how to use a glass cutter. Holmes might have been a professor congratulating a student on good marks. "I can do things with my hands. I started out working with puppets." before you took up female impersonating. Irritation flitted over Hooblin's face. There was more money in the impersonating. I could sing in a high key and dance enough to get by. Men in the audience used to try to grab me. They felt like fools when I took off my wig. But you never liked it. No, people thought I was a freak. So you wanted to do something truly dangerous. Be a Robin Hood. Holmes corrected himself. William Tell. The veil was completely brushed aside from the eyes now. They glowed. It wasn't the wooden puppets or cosmetics and wigs. It was exciting. No make-believe. The darkness, the silence, and the thrill when you got away and knew that you had done it. You fooled them. Fooled everybody, commented Holmes factually. But I was fooled in the end. The thought was a bitter one, and the shutters of Hooplin's eyes started to close again. I sensed he was beginning to drift back into the catatonic escape, but Holmes was alert to this danger as well. What about Frau Müller? That was the finest touch. This bait proved irresistible, and the performer was with us again. That was easy. No one suspected me. Because you always impersonated beautiful women. The small face nodded jerkily. Frau Müller was a crone. I blackened several teeth. Her wig looked like frayed hemp. I penciled in lines and used a rat right here. A slender finger indicated an area between chin and lips. One look at Frau Müller was enough. She was an unpleasant sight. I had to give up the cabaret work, of course, so that you could pose as a night cleaning woman at headquarters, not being an old or arthritic woman at all, but young and agile. You could fulfill the duties of the job and have some extra time to search through the Meldwesen files until you found the cards you wanted. The first four robberies were trial runs. I wanted to do something big, something that would be in the papers and that people would talk about for years. So you decided to steal the act of Shadow Shady, Holmes's show business colloquialism pleased O'Brien. I had to practice for months, but finally I mastered the suction cups. I am very light, you see. That helped, and you turned yourself into a veritable human fly. Hoobline nodded. The papers were full of the purchase by Mannheim of the golden tablets. I thought that would be the great robbery, the one that would cause the most talk. The tablets were so valuable that I could sell them and retire. No more cabarets and no more Frau Müller either. But they were white gold. No fence would touch them. There was anguish in Hooblin's face now, and the suggestion of moisture in his eyes. I'd done it. I'd worked so hard and planned so carefully, and I had ended up with nothing. When the Chinaman approached me and offered me so little for the tablets, I felt my whole life was for nothing. I was a puppet with no one on the strings. I sold him the tablets, and then the voice dwindled away. The seated man's head slowly turned back so that his unseeing eyes were fastened on the blank wall again. Heinrich Hublein had retraced his steps back to the kingdom of forgetfulness, of silence, of nothingness. Holmes's eyes encountered mine. There was a resigned expression in them, as though he realized that he had no more bait to tempt the vanishing personality back into the world of reality. He signaled to Hammer, who opened the cell door. Hoobline was not conscious of our departure. An aura of sadness enveloped me when we left the poor, misguided, unbalanced man, but it vaporized in the heat of excitement liberally spiced by wonderment. Holmes, how did you ever deduce that Hoopline was the perpetrator of 5 crimes, and that he created the character of a spurious cleaning woman? There was a thin smile on Holmes's aquiline features that I recognized as an indication that he was pleased with himself. When Vaughan Shalloway described the robberies in his office, did not something strike you? I cast my mind back in a determined effort to locate the telltale that had allowed Holmes to cut the Gordian knot. But in my heart of hearts sensed that it would elude me. Each crime bore the trademark of one criminal who had a cast-iron alibi. The alibis were happenstance. Think, Watson. The Montmorency robbery involved the flat of a fence. In Bremen, the jewels were stolen from a suspected smuggler. It immediately occurred to me that someone was using the Meldwesen files not only to copy the methods of certain criminals, but to select the victims as well. Who besides the officials would have access to the files? Someone invisible. Oh, come now, Holmes. Patience, old chap. Mailmen have certain invisibility. We see them on their appointed rounds with such regularity that after a while we cease to see them. A cleaning woman falls in the same category, and we had Hublein, a female impersonator. The Germans file and list everything, so I was able to learn that on the night-time cleaning force, a certain Frau Müller failed to show up for work the day the Hublein surrendered himself to the police. She has not been located to this day, until the elusive Frau Müller was unmasked by Sherlock Holmes, I said proudly. Your discoveries will certainly delight Vaughan Shalloway. But how do they affect us? Hoobline mentioned a Chinaman who purchased the tablets. from him at bargain rates. Chusanfu? Holmes shook his head. An agent of his, no doubt. This was 4 years ago, and Chu was still in the role of the collector. I suspect he secured the tablets because they were too good a bargain to miss. Since then, something has happened that has made them precious to him. We were almost back at Von Shalloway's office when another thought struck me. Hoobline mentioned white gold. What is that, Holmes? Pure gold is 24 carats. In modern times, most gold is mixed with an alloy to provide rigidity. The most common, 14 carat, has a large percentage of brass. Pink gold uses copper. White gold can be produced in two ways: with nickel, which is inexpensive, or with platinum, which is rarer and more valuable than gold itself. The sacred tablets used platinum as an alloy, not for the sake of rigidity, it being as malleable as gold, but for ostentation. No receiver would touch the tablets because of the platinum content. I think they misled Hoobline there. The man was not a trained criminal, but merely a mimic. A fence could have had the tablets melted down and then separated the gold and platinum. I think the robbery was just a little too hot and it scared them off. Not long thereafter we returned to the Bristol Kempinski, leaving a delighted Von Shalloway in Alexanderplatz. The police chief, with his unresolved cases solved and the matter of Hoopline cleared up as well, was much inclined towards hosting a victory dinner, but Holmes begged off, I regret to say. He stated that duties beckoned, and Von Shalloway was too acute to inquire as to their nature. Back at the hotel, Holmes indulged in one of his disappearing acts. I suspect that he beat a hasty path to the British Embassy and made use of the diplomatic wire to contact his brother in London. What other messages he may have sent or received, I do not know. On his return, we packed, which was not time-consuming since we were travelling light. Now Holmes was intent on reaching Egypt. I mentioned, somewhat snidely perhaps, that I hoped the freighter carrying the relics stolen from the Spaulding mansion had not altered its plan of sailing and beaten us to Alexandria. Holmes, as usual, had an answer. The Hishauri Kamo was missing two stokers just before they weighed anchor, Watson. They were forced to sign on two new crew members, Burlington Bertie and Tiny. The freighter is on schedule and will not reach Egypt for some days. So Holmes had planted his men on the cargo ship to keep an eye open. I had thought him somewhat casual about the sacred sword to which he attached so much importance. I suggested that we augment our limited wardrobe at one of the fashionable Berlin shops But there was no time for that. Holmes booked us by rail to Constanza, Romania. The train trip was dull, but there was a surprise when we arrived at the port on the Black Sea. A carriage took us to the waterfront, where we boarded a destroyer of Her Majesty's Navy, a means of transportation provided without a doubt by Mycroft Holmes. Wasting no time, the needle-thin craft traversed the Black Sea to the Dardanelles, and soon we were pitching and tossing in the Mediterranean. I shall draw the curtain of charity over this trip. Suffice to say that I was pale, worn, and frightfully sick throughout. Holmes did his best, I must say, staying with me in the little cabin in the officers' quarters that we shared. In an effort to distract me from my misery, he did speak in unusual detail about the matter that we were involved in, opening up a new line of thought completely. You know, good fellow, ancient Egypt was a literate society, completely capable of leaving a clear history, and after Champollion deciphered the Rosetta Stone, it was reasonable to expect answers to age-old mysteries. But such was not the case. You feel the golden tablets might unlock hidden doors? I asked, and then made myself available of the tin basin that Holmes had in readiness. Or I may be in fear of it. We are very vague on how they built the pyramids, you know, and have no idea of why they are aligned with the four compass points, or why the Sphinx and the Colossi of Memnon both face east, parallel, by the way, with the axis of the great Ammon-Ra temple at Karnak. "Simple, Holmes," I sputtered, wiping my face and mouth with a wet towel. "The rising sun. They did worship the sun along with other deities." "I'll accept that," he said, "but consider that other ancient structures, seemingly impossible to build in a non-mechanical age, are also lined up to risings and settings of the sun and moon. I refer to Stonehenge and the Mayan temples in Yucatan, to name but two. Good heavens! Do you suspect some cosmic significance? Some secret power? I never got an answer to that, for I became deathly sick again and lost all interest in the subject.